Welcome back, everyone. My name is Ed Hickey, and I'm the president of the American Association of Kidney Patients and chair of the Veterans Health Initiative. I'm very pleased to lead our next panel discussion, which will focus on innovations the FDA must support to advance kidney transplantation. We're at a pivotal moment in transplant innovation at a time when science and technology are evolving faster than ever. Yet some outdated regulatory frameworks are holding back progress that could transform patients' lives. For the tens of thousands of Americans currently waiting for a kidney transplant, innovation is not a distant goal, it's a matter of survival. But here in the United States, FDA review and approval processes have not kept pace with unmet patient needs or new developments. Today, we'll hear from academic and industry leaders who understand the complexities of these concerns and the implications for both patient care choice and transplant patient outcomes. They'll speak about the promising innovations on the horizon and the critical role FDA plays in bringing to the market new solutions for transplant patients without compromising the scientific integrity that underlies patient safety. We'll also explore how patients, clinicians, innovators, and policymakers can work together to ensure that regulatory systems reflect the realities of the people they serve, especially those living with kidney disease and those hoping for a second chance at life through transplant. Let's get started by welcoming our panelists. Dr. Kenneth Newell, our good friend and professor of surgery in transplantation program at Director of Abdominal Transplant Surgery Fellowship at Emory University School of Medicine. Dr. Newell is also a committee member of the Transplant Therapeutics Consortium and a 2024 AAKP Medal of Excellence Award recipient. Ms. Jennifer Leonard, Director of U.S. Medical Affairs and Clinical Field Operations at Hansa Biopharma, and Ms. Jennifer Bergheiser, Chief Business Officer at eGenesis Incorporated. Dr. Newell, we'll start with you. You've been a consistent and powerful voice at our policy summits and regularly update us on the FDA's progress or lack thereof to facilitate the next generation of transplant drugs. Can you speak to where things stand today and what still needs to change within the FDA to finally open the door to meaningful innovation in transplant therapeutics?
Certainly. Thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Hickey, Mr. Conway, Ms. Kleins for inviting me to participate. I see Mr. Knight here. I've been moved over the years by not only their passion for advancing the patient perspective in decision-making, but their effectiveness, perhaps more importantly. Over a decade ago, I had the privilege of being the president of the American Society of Transplantation. And in my presidential address, I reviewed what I thought were transformative changes that our forefathers had introduced that really put transplantation where it was a decade ago. And then I went on to lament what I saw as the tremendous lack of innovation, just a stagnation in our field. And I was overly negative and I was incorrect, as we'll hear about changes in xenotransplantation, transplant diagnostics, machine perfusion, making many more organs available. There's a lot of innovation in transplant right now, I'm proud to say. Unfortunately, it's not in the area of drug development. If we want to improve long-term outcomes, we're only going to do that by coming up with more effective and safer immunosuppressive agents. I think the major barrier is the endpoint we use. The current endpoint we use, somebody mentioned that like the last time sunscreens were, the formulations approved was when there were iPods or before iPods. I will tell you that the last time that the endpoint for clinical trials was changed was before there was digital music. We were in the transition from cassette tapes to CDs. So it was in the 1980s. And the endpoint that they came up with was the cumulative effect of death, graft loss, and rejection. And that was a very effective endpoint back then when rejection rates were 90%, graft survival for a kidney transplant was less than 50%. You could move the needle. Now when you're to the point that, and this is a blessing, but where, patient survival's like 98%, graft survival 95%, rejection rates in single digits, it's hard to keep squeezing harder and see a change. So almost every study done is now a non-inferiority design. The last drug approved in transplantation for de novo transplant, kidney transplant, was belatacept in 2012. After studying hundreds of patients for over a decade at a huge cost, the company was allowed to say, we have a therapy that is no worse than what we compared it to. That's not an appealing approach for companies or for patients. No one wants to say we invested all this time and now we have something that's no worse. And you can argue it might be better. You can get people to say that, but you can't label it that way. So that's the real barrier. Recognizing this, the American Society of Transplantation, the American Society of Transplant Surgeons, and a number of industry partners formed the Transplant Therapeutics Consortium. This is a public-private partnership recognized and supported by the FDA, saying that there is a problem with the pipeline of drug development and transplant, and we set out to come up with solutions to that. If you look at how other fields have approached this, cancer therapy, dozens of drugs approved, most of them using surrogate endpoints. No one says, I'm diagnosed with a cancer today, and you're going to follow me hopefully for 10 or 15 years to see how long I survive. Survival is not really an endpoint that people are interested in. It's not an effective endpoint. It's not actionable. If you look at something closer to home, IgA nephropathy, there were no drugs for that. And then they came up with a new endpoint. You didn't have to wait for advanced CKD or kidney failure to assess a therapy. And that revolutionized drug development for IgA nephropathy. So we need something similar in transplant. And what the Transplant Therapeutics Consortium did is try to promote a tool called the iBox. It's a composite endpoint. There are many things that are associated with diminished kidney survival. Your eGFR, estimated glomerular filtration rate, proteinuria, the development of de novo or new antibodies directed against the kidney, the way the kidney looks on a biopsy. But none of those alone was predictive enough to predict outcomes at a meaningful time period. And by this, we're saying we've changed from we're worried about getting to 1 year as we were in the 80s to now we want to go 10, 20, 25 years. We're worried about quality of life in that period. And so this new tool is developed to say, let's measure something at a year that will predict long-term outcomes or intermediate term, 5, 7 years. It was developed by Alex Lupi and his colleagues at the Hospital Nectar. It's been validated over thousands and thousands of patient data sets, or patients in data sets, clinical trials, and we submitted this to the FDA with their guidance and approval at every step along the way. This process started in 2017. And when I spoke last year, there was quite some concern that it may be ending and not in a positive way. I guess it was, I believe in November, a year and a half ago, that the FDA hosted a meeting. And it initially did not include much patient representation. But through the AAKP, other patient groups, other patient advocates, the patients showed up and really spoke to the FDA about the need and what was wanted and what they expected. And that kind of rejuvenated this project. So I'm happy to say that just yesterday, the FDA informed us that our final qualification package was eligible for review. Now, it's been being reviewed, as Mr. Hickey knows, for years and years and years. But now we're to the final review. The final review has a time limit. For the first time ever, the FDA by policy needs to respond in 10 months with a decision. Now, we all know that in today's world, there's some probably flexibility to that. But I'm excited to see that happening. And I think it's only through groups like the AAKP that we're even here, because no one really listens to us. And when I thought about, meaning clinicians, when I thought about this, I thought how medicine has changed over the decades I've been in it. When I started, the concept of informed consent was I walked in and I said, I've looked at everything and I think what you need to have done is this. And it has some risks, and I kind of go over the risks, and then it's like, I would like you to sign here so we can get on with this. And that's kind of, I think, how the FDA has approached this. I think patients should have a voice in what sort of risk they accept. With any new endpoint, there's some risk it may not be perfect. And of course, the enemy, of good is perfect. I think this is much better. The predictive power of this endpoint is much better than commonly accepted tools like the kidney donor risk profile that we use to assess the quality of donated organs, expected post-transplant survival. This is a more accurate tool than those, and we use those every day in patient care. So I think hearing patients say, we need and expect to change, and we don't expect perfect, and we realize that there can be an occasional misstep, but I think patients should have the ability to voice their opinion and their willingness to look at new things, as opposed to having kind of the paternalistic, the way medicine used to be, where I'll decide for you and help you decide what's best. So I'm excited to see that. I think there'll be next steps in this, in the Transplant Therapeutics Consortium, looking at other things, such as safety profiles of immunosuppressive agents. You can have two drugs that are equally effective, but if one has much worse side effects than the other, you have to be able to approve the less dangerous drug. There's no mechanism for that. That's where the patient voice counts. Quality of life, we heard about this morning. Quality, adjusted years of life. Those are important things, and I think that if this goes through, it will provide the impetus to continue these types of partnerships. So I'll stop there and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Ken. That's great news. Thank you very much. And 10 months is a lot better than 10 years. But, one more day is too long as far as I'm concerned.
Well, we'll see. I'm more optimistic now than a year ago when I started.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, on an even more optimistic note, we're going to hear from Ms. Leonard of Hansa Biopharma, which has developed a novel enzyme-based therapy designed to address a long-standing barrier to kidney transplantation, where highly sensitized patients whose immune systems have developed high levels of antibodies often turn to transplants, blood transfusions, pregnancies, making it extremely difficult to find compatible kidney donors. In fact, many remain on transplant waiting lists for years longer than average, or never, and some are never transplanted at all. Hansa's therapy is on track to allow a successful transplantation in patients who would otherwise be considered ineligible. It represents a paradigm shift in how we approach immunologic barriers to transplantation, offering hope, better outcomes, and significantly improved quality of life for a population that has historically had very limited options. However, for this therapy and others like it to fulfill its promise, we need FDA flexibility, CMS responsiveness, and a system that values high-need patients. Can you speak to how Hansa is navigating these challenges, particularly potential barriers that must be overcome, and how patients and physicians can support your efforts?
Yes, thank you again. I'd like to thank the AAKP for allowing me the opportunity to be here today, along with my other colleagues on this panel, where we can really show you our passion for kidney and kidney transplant patients. So with that, let me start off by saying, Hansa Biotech is a small biotech company located in Sweden, and we have a focus on antibodies, particularly antibodies that cause problems for patients, and as Ed stated, mainly deter them from getting a transplant. So we have research in autoimmune therapies, gene therapies, and more specifically for this talk today, desensitization in kidney transplantation. So Hansa has two molecules within our portfolio, both of which cleave what's called IgG antibodies. It inactivates these antibodies. The first is imlifidase, which is conditionally approved in Europe and has been for about 4 or 5 years. And we just received approval in Australia last year. Now, the approval is for highly sensitized patients that are in need of desensitization to enable a kidney transplant. Within the US, we're in phase 3 studies currently. We hope to finish those studies in a few weeks and then submit our BLA to the FDA by the end of the year. So our second molecule is a second-generation imlifidase. It's known as Hansa 5487. It also is a potent cleaver of IgG antibody. The difference between the two entities is that imlifidase is a one-and-done drug. You receive it once in your lifetime, and that's it. Hansa 5487, we hope to be able to redose over and over again in the course of disease. So the problem, right? So we have basically about over 91,000 patients currently sitting on the wait list in the US, right? 30% about of those patients will receive a kidney transplant this year. On the flip side, 10% of those patients will either die or become too sick to receive a transplant. Your highly sensitized patients are the patients that have, let's say, a broad range of antibodies that prevents them from finding a compatible donor. So these are your patients that have the higher probability of becoming too sick to proceed to transplant or die on the waiting list before finding a compatible donor. So the problem that we're looking at and trying to solve today is how do we remove the barriers for the highly sensitized patient and enable them to also experience the gift of life? How can we work with clinicians to help these patients level the playing field for them to actually enable them to get to transplant? And so I feel that there's 4 ways that we can start just today as a group, as a collective, to help remove barriers for these patients. And I'm gonna use the analogy or the acronym EGGS, right? We're gonna break a few eggs, we're gonna make a few changes, and we're gonna start to take action and move forward to remove barriers not only for the highly sensitized patient, but for other kidney patients that want to proceed to transplantation. So first and foremost, let's start with E, education and transparency. We need to do a better job. We need to provide more comprehensive and consistent education of highly sensitized patients across all transplant centers in the US. Patients need to understand what it means, or they need to understand their sensitization status, first and foremost, and they need to understand what it means to be highly sensitized. Many of them do not know that this means that they may or may not find a compatible donor. Also, most importantly, we need to make sure that patients are educated on all of their treatment options that are available to them, regardless of if they're available at a specific center, right? So many times, patients, again, once you educate them that they're highly sensitized and what it means to be highly sensitized, they may have a living donor to which they're incompatible. However, there's an option to enter a paired kidney exchange program, right? But say that your center doesn't offer that opportunity to patients, right? Maybe the conversation needs to be that this is an option that might be available to you, and these are the centers that participate in paired kidney exchange programs. Maybe you should pursue going to another center. They could be more suitable to your needs and your care, right? There's also right now an investigational therapy known as desensitization that, again, is not widely utilized within the US at this point, right? But there's about 5 centers that actually engage in this practice and routinely transplant highly sensitized patients like yourself. Maybe if this is an option to you, you should be pursuing or going and investigating these centers and seeing if they can help you move forward with the transplant. We need to do a better job educating our patients and empowering them to be advocates for their own care. And then that way they can be better partners in this decision-making process, right? And own their care. So that's one, that's a big one for me. Number 2, G, guideline-directed care. So again, I know in transplantation, we're not big on guidelines from center to center and protocols, standardizing practices across centers. However, as we get more and more innovation and new therapies, and again, practices like xenotransplant, desensitization, that are not routinely done from center to center, it would be nice to have guidances from those that are routinely doing these practices and engaging in this research, right? And having these best practices that can be shared from center to center to standardize the care and create an equity across the continuum of care in transplantation. What we've seen in Europe as imlifidase has been approved in country to country and they've developed these guidelines, it's kind of caused its desensitization become more institutionalized across centers, right? And really equalize the care of highly sensitized patients across the country. So there's been benefit. The next way I feel we can remove barriers is by looking at goals and metrics that are currently placed on our transplant centers. Metrics today penalize transplant centers for taking risk. And again, transplant is a risky business, right? But many centers can't afford to take risk because it affects their metrics, it affects their standings, and their reimbursement. So we need to, especially in this time of change of policy, and the chaos that's going on. We don't know where the dust is going to settle, right? But we need to raise our voice and say, you know what? We're about to institute things like IOTA, I believe, in July, right? Which is actually propelling centers to increase the number of transplants they do, all in the environment of having more marginal donors come to the plate. So I would argue that they're already forcing you into doing more risky transplants, more risky procedures. So again, they should be incentivizing, not punishing centers for doing these procedures and taking on these patients, right? They should be incentivizing centers to develop protocols to manage these complex patients, right? So again, what's happening right now is actually stifling innovation with metrics. And then finally, I think the most important topic of the day, S, speed of innovation. I opened my discussion today to say that imlifidase is available in other regions of the world. It's an option for patients in other countries. We don't have it here, right? We as a collective, patients, healthcare providers, industry, regulators, we all want the same thing for our patients. We want new and novel, innovative therapies that are safe and effective, that optimize the lives of our patients, right? So we need to work together. We need to do better. We need to balance speed with, again, as you've alluded to, balance speed with what we need to prove for safety and efficacy, right? I don't want to discount what's being done with iBox. We have great progress. And like I was going to allude to, we found out yesterday that it's now reviewable. We're on a time clock with the FDA. This is great. So hopefully by early next year, we'll have novel endpoints to propel innovation forward for transplant. But you know what? This is step number one. We have xenotransplant coming up the pike. We can't continue to put a square peg in a round hole. We need to understand what clinical designs and trials need to be put forward to propel things like xenotransplant forward to help more patients. So I'm just going to say, let's break a few eggs. Let's start taking some action and remove the barriers for patients to move forward with innovation. So thank you.
Thank you. We're happy to break a few eggs. We like omelets. So. We appreciate that very much, and we stand firmly with you and your team to ensure that the often forgotten communities of highly sensitized patients are not left behind. These patients deserve the same opportunity and equal chance at life-saving kidney transplant, and we'll continue to advocate to make that a reality. And now I'm pleased to turn to Ms. Berkheiser, who represents a company that is truly redefining what's possible in transplant science, eGenesis. eGenesis is a pioneering innovative solutions in xenotransplantation, an area of research that just a few years ago seemed futuristic, but today has captured America's imagination for how to think differently about organ availability and access. Their work has the potential to reduce the kidney transplant waiting list significantly, providing patients with hope for a future without years of dialysis and prolonged suffering. But for that future to be realized, FDA support is critical, and it's needed now. The decisions are being made today at FDA that will shape the regulatory foundation for xenotransplantation for years to come. We cannot afford to let the caution turn into delay or innovation be slowed by outdated processes. Ms. Berkheiser, can you share more about the work that eGenesis is doing and what's needed from regulators to ensure that these breakthroughs can reach the patients who need them most?
Thank you so much, Ed. Absolutely. And thank you to AAKP for the opportunity to speak with you all today. We absolutely appreciate the chance to tell more about the eGenesis story, the work that we're doing, and really I think the work being done more broadly in the field of xenotransplantation. This is a field that is decades, if not centuries. It's not a new idea in the making, and for many of us, the progress has felt like it's been too slow for far too long. But I think what we've seen just over the last 5 to 10 years, and certainly the last few years, is a major leap forward, getting into patients for the first time ever. And I think what it is not only a story of the power of innovation, but it's really the story of the power of multi-stakeholder collaboration that can, working toward a common goal, move major change forward. Everything from the work being done in academia for years, pushing this work forward, to the pioneering clinicians who were doing transplants in the animal models, finally moving into to patients. And ultimately what we've seen over the past few years is the FDA working with industry and working with the clinical community to devise ways of safely evaluating this new modality so that we can get into patients. And finally, I think patients have been the ultimate pioneers here. As I'll talk about our work at eGenesis, it's been patients who have boldly stepped forward to allow us to begin to learn in the clinical setting what we'll need to move this space forward. So I think that's a real glimmer of hope for us as we look at the pace of change that has really picked up over the last few years. So just to share a little bit about what we're doing at eGenesis, as many of you know and as Ed laid out, we are working on developing a novel and what we call renewable or sustainable supply of organs for transplant. And we're doing that by creating pigs that are engineered for greater compatibility with humans to ultimately serve as donors for transplant. We share the belief that patients with kidney disease and kidney failure deserve more options, and we believe that among the options being advanced in industry, xenotransplantation provides one of the most near-term feasible pathways to eliminating supply as a barrier to transplant. We believe that supply should not dictate outcomes for patients with organ failure, and we want to ensure that we broaden access to all who could benefit. As I mentioned, the concept of xenotransplantation is not a new one and actually predates allotransplantation. It's actually centuries old, but it's really only been in the last several decades that we've had the tools and technologies available to us to take this to the next level, which is to patients. More broadly speaking, the concept of using animals in medicine is also not new. Our earliest versions of insulin were sourced from pigs. Even today, we implant tens of thousands of porcine valves into patients with valvular disease and heart disease. And so we're very familiar, right, with the use of animals in medicine. And so the use of whole animal organs really just represents the next frontier in this progression and the next frontier in transplant medicine. But it hasn't been for that long, frankly, that we've had the convergence of enabling technologies available to us and our disposal to build the organs that we need to go into people. So really starting, within the last 8 to 10 years or so, this convergence began to take hold, enabling technologies from mammalian cloning that we had back in the 90s converged with more modern approaches to gene editing, to novel immunosuppression agents, et cetera. And eGenesis and other companies in the field are really leveraging, right, that convergence of technologies to build the organs that have greater compatibility and can safely be used in humans. So since 2017, with our founding, we've been focused on building a fully integrated biopharmaceutical company spanning our operations in genome engineering, where we do editing at the cellular level, to the cloning and production we do with pigs in our Midwest facilities, to our transplantation collaborations with transplant centers all over the country. We can see with the clinicians with whom we work and the healthcare teams with which we work that they are on the front lines of this problem every day, and they are clamoring to move this solution forward as quickly as we can. And so they've been at the forefront of our preclinical work and moving it into the clinic. So beginning in 2023, after about 5 years of work in non-human primates led by our colleagues at Mass General in Boston, we published the most extensive data set in kidney transplant in the non-human primate model, demonstrating 1 to 2 years survival in cynomolgus monkeys that had been transplanted with our engineered kidneys. Prior to this data set being published, the prevailing survival time in monkeys or non-human primates had been on a matter of months. And so this, in concert with additional evidence being generated at other centers, NYU, UAB, looking at implantation or transplant of engineered organs in decedent or brain-dead recipients, all of this evidence came together in the 2023-2024 period. And in 2024, it served as a body of evidence that allowed the FDA to clear Mass General Hospital to conduct the first ever porcine to human kidney transplant in a living recipient. So our patient, Mr. Rick Slayman, who boldly chose to be the first, is pictured here with his clinical team. That transplant was done in March of 2024. Mr. Slayman told his team that he did this to provide hope for the many patients who would follow him. Mr. Slayman had suffered from kidney failure for 12 years, had been on dialysis for 7, had sustained a prior failed transplant, had experienced prior cancer, had extensive cardiovascular disease, and had been through over 30 vascular access surgeries. And so his prognosis was grim. And the transplant was successful. Mr. Slayman was able to return home. He was able to go off dialysis, and the kidney provided life-sustaining function for 52 days. At 52 days, Mr. Slayman sadly passed away due to an arrhythmia. The cause of death was determined to be his extensive underlying cardiovascular disease and not related to the transplant or to any rejection processes. In reviewing the case, our review team at the FDA told the team at Mass General and the team at eGenesis that we should continue. That this modality and the need on the part of patients merits moving forward. And so it's really been in Rick's honor and in honor of all patients in need of novel options that we move forward. So later in 2024, the FDA then cleared a 3-patient kidney transplant study under expanded access. The first patient as part of this 3-patient study was transplanted in January of 2025. Mr. Tim Andrews, pictured here with Drs. Tetsuo Kawai and Dr. Riella at Mass General. Mr. Tim Andrews had suffered from kidney failure for over 2 years. He had experienced precipitous health decline following his diagnosis of kidney failure, had been on dialysis since that time, but he had heard about the transplant of Mr. Slayman and reached out to his care team at Mass General, volunteering to become the next patient. So in January of this year, he was transplanted. He entered Mass General a few days before the transplant, wheelchair-bound due to his extreme fatigue as a result of years on dialysis, and he was discharged over a week later on foot. He has been off of dialysis since the transplant. He's experiencing stable graft function, and he's become a tireless advocate and very outspoken advocate for this novel option being given the chance to continue to be evaluated. In addition to Mr. Slayman and Mr. Andrews, there have been a number of other patients, both in the U.S. and reportedly outside the U.S., who have been given these transplants, porcine engineered kidney transplants, under expanded access. And so it's a major leap forward. It's a pivotal moment, we believe, in the field, and it couldn't have been possible without the multi-stakeholder collaboration that I mentioned at the outset, from the research community to the clinical community to regulators, again, thinking through with developers and with clinicians and with patients a way to safely bring this into the clinical realm. And what we look at next is further expanding our clinical experience in the form of formal clinical trials. The FDA approved a formal clinical trial for United Therapeutics earlier in 2025, and we look forward to eGenesis moving into formal clinical trials later this year. So one is expanding the clinical experience. The other is understanding in concert with regulators as well as patients what will be the endpoints that will be meaningful in moving these products forward, so meaningful in the lives of patients as well as meaningful clinically. And it'll be that focus that we take into the next few years to continue to advance the space forward.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Burkhardt. That's amazing. And it really is incredible. And I appreciate your presence here today, as well as Ms. Leonard and Dr. Newell, for sharing your time, expertise, and your passion for improving the lives of American kidney patients. And your insights today remind us that innovation isn't just about science, it's about people. And the path forward depends on collaboration and research, regulation, and advocacy to ensure that every patient has access to the treatments and hope that they deserve.